Islam will continue to be triumphant until there have been 12 Khulafa, all of them from Al-Quraysh.
The God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever.
This is my brother, my executor, and my successor among you, so listen to him and obey.
My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting.
Whoso obeys me obeys God. Whoever disobeys me disobeys God. Whoever disobeys my commander disobeys me.
The Lord said to me, You are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, and the ends of the earth your possession.
Two systems of government, two visions for life on earth. Whichever is true changes everything. This is Christ and Khulafa.
Welcome back to Christ and Caliphate. Today we are reviewing the movie Our Lady of Heaven. So we just finished watching this. So what's everyone's first impressions? First of all, let's just talk about it from a cinematic perspective here. What do we think of the movie?
I think really good work there. When it's the cinema work, acting skills and all things put together. Really impressive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cinematography was very good. I did like the acting. I thought that some were better than others, but it's really hard to get around. Like, the main character, you never see her face, so I can't really tell if she's like a good actor or not. So it's, but yeah, it was great production.
Yeah, I mean, the one of the most insane facts of this is a $15 million movie that made like $70,000.
Yeah.
So definitely a lot of sunk costs in this movie.
Totally. And I was looking at the sets throughout the movie and wondering, like, did they build all that? They had to have.
Good.
They had to have built all that. It's not like you could just go find that somewhere,
Right. Like, the production value is amazing. Cinematography is amazing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that are like derivative in the movie as well. Like, there's definitely some moments that's like, okay, that's 300. The map thing that's Lord of the Rings.
I mean, Aisha is Gollum.
Okay. Well, let's clarify that.
Yeah. I don't mean that. The way it sounded.
So the
she was portrayed as a subhuman evil creature-ish person. Right.
witchy lady.
Yeah, like a witch.
The cinematographer worked on Guardians of the Galaxy, Robin Hood, Lost in Space, and Star Wars Episode 5.
Okay. Well,
That makes a lot of sense now.
yeah. I mean, the movie looked amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, from the work itself.
This is the most high production value movie I've seen, which was not released in any theaters anywhere.
Right.
And it makes sense why it's not released in theaters, if this is not to be shown in theaters in Muslim countries. In West, you can show it, some people will watch it, but if your audience is Muslim, that's not a Muslim material at all. No.
So why? Why is this movie so controversial?
I mean, the first thing is you see the Prophet's face. I mean, that would be controversial to any Muslim.
Right.
So that's it takes a while for you to see his face, but there's a lot of depictions of the Prophet, right? So that's taboo. And then just the storyline and the perspective of the storyline being from a Shia perspective would cause a lot of anger, among Sunnis, and probably some Shia with the way that it was depicted as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I mean, this wasn't just like a little bit Shia.
Right.
This was straight from the Shia fire hose Shia.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's the most conservative. There are categories of Shias. There are liberal Shias, and there are conservative Shias, and there are extreme conservative Shias.
Right.
And that's coming from them for sure. The way we see Omar and Abu Bakr in that series, like super villains, right?
Right.
And that comes from their own approach of like how they want to see Umar and Abu Bakr.
Right.
And that's why you see like this.
And there's a
real
big
extreme.
spotlight shined on how they're bullies and they're murderers, but deep down inside they're really cowards when they're confronted with anything.
Yeah.
Or that they're power hungry and they're just trying to like hold on to their power.
Yeah.
So
And I think this is a little far from history. If we stand on a neutral ground, we see
a little far from history.
It was written by a Shia cleric, Yasir al-Habib, of the Mahdi Servants Union, and Fadak TV.
Interesting.
So actually, I think like how conspiratorial this movie was, as far as making Omar and Abu Bakr like the worst possible people.
Mm-hmm.
I think it actually weakens the movie as an overall movie. You have very one-dimensional heroes and very one-dimensional villains.
Right.
Basically, Abu Bakr and Omar are portrayed as religious extremists. Not even religious extremists. Just power-hungry, like, mobsters with no religious interests at all.
Yeah.
right.
Like, that's the portrayal of these characters in the movie. And to me, I don't think there's really anyone like that anywhere in real life.
Right.
Like, even mobsters are not that like that.
Yeah, if we read Omar Abu Bakr's history, we see there is a lot more than that what we see here, right? Their commitment, dedication towards Islam, and the way they established Caliphate and the way Caliphate continued over time shows us a great sign that there was a certain type of serious conviction to the process. So I think the movie is like over exaggeration of the facts, or like just trying to build a narrative that does not have any ground to stand upon.
Right. Well, it's just narrative, period. The whole thing is narrative. It's how can we get our narrative across, right? It's definitely not objective.
Because they made the connection like, oh, your modern day ISIS is like the descendants of these two men
Right.
in the movie.
Right.
And that's so, it like dehumanizes all the characters.
Right.
And it doesn't, that's just not good storytelling.
Right.
Because it's not complex.
Right.
Because humans are a lot more complex.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it, actually. I really feel like it's not a complex story.
Mm-hmm.
But in reality, it is a complex story.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's like we have to make this narrative fit our agenda. So in order to do that, we have to take the complexity out of the story and make it like really one-dimensional.
Which Hollywood does.
Oh,
well.
sure. I
Which
mean,
it's all just...
side note, I saw 80 for Brady, right? It's a dumb movie, but nothing in the movie is factual except for the fact that there were a couple of old ladies who liked Tom Brady, right? So like you get that in the first 5 minutes, but then the whole rest of the movie is like a contrived, thing. Like it's just they've just wrote a script. And while I don't think this movie is precisely that, because it has some at least basis in history, right? Like there was a story, there was an Ali, there was a Muhammad, there was an Aisha, there was a there was a Fatima, and when you're like looking at it from that lens, yes, like those things are true. So but like what they did with those characters' lives, what they did with these people's lives was just, well, who cares if it's true, right? Like,
Yeah.
Who cares if it's true? The audience, we have to do this for the sake of the movie. And you're right, Hollywood does that all the time.
Yeah, which is just doesn't make for a good movie. But it had very beautiful, cinematography.
Yeah.
Speaking
Very
of the
beautiful shots.
production value, the claim this movie makes is that Muhammad and Ali are all like CGI.
Right.
If that's true, that is better than the CGI people in Star Wars.
It's better than like the last couple seasons, like the Book of Boba Fett and the Mandalorian, and
that is the best fake people ever made on film.
Yeah.
If that's actually what happened.
right.
Yeah.
I have, for the face of Muhammad, it looks like it, but when consider Ali and his face, the way he was like looking so real and so human.
I think what they did was they just digitally augmented the face. It's kind of like, you know how in Rogue One they brought Tarkin back and they made an actor look like him, but or even better, like the new Indiana Jones movie, right? Like in the first like 10 minutes, he's young Indiana Jones, and I think that they did that with the actor's face. They just took the actor's face and then morphed it into what they wanted it to look like, but there's still an actor's face under there.
I think they just hired some unknown actors,
Right.
and said it was CGI. I think this is
Psych!
I think this is all some just like giant conspiracy that it's like, all right, we'll just don't worry, we'll pay you, we won't credit you, and we'll just say it's CGI.
Right.
And
That'd be the easiest way.
and here's my argument for that. So if you look at IMDb,
Mm-hmm.
there were hundreds of people in that movie,
Right.
and there's like 15 people who are credited for the movie.
Right.
Oh.
Like, so Aisha, who is basically portrayed by, I think, a Somali woman who has like yellow teeth, crooked yellow teeth.
I think
Right,
I
and
think
that was insane.
I think
That
they
was
augmented
insane.
her teeth. I think they made her teeth like sharp, like make it look like,
Yeah,
know.
and that was the most insane thing to see because Aisha was considered one of the most beautiful ladies, and it should be considered in Shia Muslims and Sunni Muslims altogether. There should not be a problem because we see a lot of hadith references coming from Sunni sources and Shia sources.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what was the reason of like portraying Aisha in a way that she is so ugly and so her teeth are crooked and all that stuff, right? So.
I mean, I don't know.
Again, even if you think Aisha is a villain,
Yeah.
like making her Gollum from Lord of the Rings wearing a hijab
Right.
is like the least interesting way to portray that.
Right.
Like if
Yeah.
she's if she's a villainous character, it'd make more sense to portray her as sort of a seductive, cunning, charming woman
Yeah.
rather than this.
It's what they did in Snow White, right? Even
Cersei.
even the queen was, beautiful,
Queen
right?
Cersei,
But
yeah.
it was Snow White who was more beautiful. Cersei, right? Like very jealous.
Yeah, she was like so
Very jealous
attractive,
character.
Yeah.
Which just goes to show the thought and worldview behind the writers and the casting.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is that if you're trying to look at a narrative, and let's just say it's not just we're crafting a narrative, we're trying to discredit a narrative, right?
Yeah.
They're trying to discredit a narrative. So if we take the narrative and we make it, we have to make it look as bad as possible. We have to make it look as unappealing as possible. We have to tie it to every bad thing in the world, right? We have to point out that in order for our narrative to be true, we have to completely just trash the other narrative, right? That's how it comes
some people
off.
came out saying was Islamophobic, and then as well as racist.
I mean,
A lot of people.
I think it's interesting because they're calling a movie. Are you saying people said that?
Yeah, they said that like
The movie is Islamophobic, even though it was
the way
made,
it portrays.
even though it was made by
well,
Muslims.
Yeah, well, the way that it. Yeah,
That's-
the way it portrays. Like Sunni Islam.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's I would say it's Islamophobic against
Or
Sunni Muslims.
Sunni-phobic,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Sunni-phobic would
Well,
be the right.
I think
word.
that might be more accurate.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and also some Shias too. I consider like there is a big divide in Shias too. It's not like everybody is on the same page, right?
Yeah.
There's like a difference. So for most who are more liberal or on the neutral ground will not approve this kind of work. Will be speaking against. And
Sure.
but yeah, there are people who just want to see Umar and Abu Bakr staged as villains and Aisha as
Right.
villains. So they would of course appreciate
Yeah.
that.
I mean, I'd be curious to ask a Shia historian, right, as to what they found.
They're
accurate
calling it a
and what they didn't.
historical drama.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's every Turkish soap opera is a historical drama,
I
you know?
guess.
Like, Every Turkish soap opera about the Ottomans. I'm not talking about the ones in the police station where the guy loves the girl and the girl loves the guy, but she loves somebody else. Like,
That's something.
Yeah. So, and the thing is, this is a shame to me because I actually think this is a weakness in Sunni and Shia Islam, in the inability to tell good stories about Islamic history, because so much of the details are just kind of flattened out.
right.
So if you watch the Omar series they made, you just have this shot of Ali, Omar, Abu Bakr, and Uthman walking side by side down the street as best friends.
Right.
Which is that's the sort of Sunni version of history. It's like, no, everybody was great. Fatima and Aisha were best friends. Ali and Aisha
Right.
were best friends.
Right.
There was no conflict between anyone ever, and everything was great.
Yeah.
But if you go into like the actual Islamic historicity
Sources,
sources, it's actually really interesting.
Yeah.
And these conflicts are complex and human and fascinating.
I mean,
And it did existed. There are some basics to history,
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Like, what percentage of the movie would you say was accurate to like Quran, Hadith?
Okay,
sources?
I would put it this
Percentage-wise.
way. I would say you take a point, stretch it to your own mile, whatever you want to do with it, right? There was points, there was accurate. This happened in history. But then whatever followed that was not true. You take one point and then stretch it.
Insofar as like written sources.
Written sources, yes, there are some accounts. Depends on what accounts you rely on. On one side, okay, just to give you an example, the burning of house. You saw that Umar comes and knocks the door and like opens it and like burns the house down. Many Sunni historians claim that this was a later addition by Shia scholars. And many Shia scholars also agree to this fact that this did not happen, right? But there is like the 12 Shias, 12ers. There is one sect that they believe that this what happened. So their source is also weak. They're relying on some 400 to 500 years after Muhammad, someone writing this down. They're relying on that only source available. There is nothing more sources confirming that specific hadith. Yes, there are so many accounts that confirm that there was confrontation between, but the burning of house was not included there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, part of what you were saying about making it less interesting, like specifically when you do the natural comparison to like the Bible, right? Like the stories in the Old Testament are filled with, and this guy plotted to get David killed. Oh, by the way, it was his son, right? Like his son tried to overthrow him, and then he went and took his best advisor, and you know what I mean? Like all of the things that are kind of make those stories what you get engrossed in those stories, right? They make the person fallible, right? They make the main character fallible. They show them that they have weaknesses. They make they highlight their mistakes, right? Like they do make mistakes. You can't tell me in the narrative of any of the hadith, right, that no one ever made a mistake.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like no one ever did anything wrong, in order to do that. So, even if you were to look at the story of, the early Islam in the beginning, there are a lot of mistakes, right? There are a lot of mistakes made by a lot of people.
Right.
Right?
Human work always involves mistakes.
Sure.
Yeah.
So one thing I think this movie does kind of inadvertently here is it just kind of makes Ali seem a little incompetent.
I agree to this part, right? This is something like from Sunni's perspective, there is a higher value of Ali. And not to say that Shia does not regard Ali, but the way the plot of Ali was played, the role of Ali was depicted, he seemed weak and kind of like not able to do certain thing and just relying on God's mercy and Muhammad saying no, to be patient.
Do in the beginning. I mean, the way I would kind of push back on that, because in the beginning of the movie he was He was Captain Islam.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, with the complete with the shield and everything.
Yeah, with
right.
this-
Like
with this-
the sword that appears is like, you know, it's like Mjolnir comes into his Muhammad's
my
hand
God.
and it goes right. You know what I mean? So the
was-
thing that I'm looking at is the I think they're trying to get a sympathetic portrayal of him.
Yeah.
Right.
Agreed.
By like he's so pious and so holy and so righteous that when he's locked in prayer, he's so locked in prayer that his wife is getting like beaten to death in a house full of on fire.
On fire.
Right? And that it's only her cries that pull him out of it, right? Like so I think they're trying to generate like no, he was so righteous.
They were trying to
right?
make him feel.
He was so pious.
Yeah.
Right.
But
right.
they were trying to make him fill Muhammad's shoes.
Right.
So it was like, first Muhammad was like the kind of stoic, perfect, no conflict guy.
Right.
And so then once he passed, then they needed for this character of Ali to fulfill that in a similar way.
Well,
So they made them
I
both
guess the thing that I
that
see
kind
is
of way.
he had his neck on Abu Bakr's throat in the burning.
Omar's
throat.
Omar's.
Sorry, in the thing, and then it's he hears like a whisper that from is it the Quran, is it the Prophet? Is it what?
Allah.
Right. What is telling him that? I'm not sure in that moment, but he has his throat. His foot on his throat, and then he shows restraint, right? So it's almost like there's still this, excuse my language, but badass in there, right?
Yeah.
But he's holding back, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so question. Let's say that this movie successfully conveyed the worldview and side of history that they wanted to convey. If it is this way that this group of people, Ali, Muhammad, Fatima, that if we are to be like them as opposed to the villains, then where does that lead people? Muslims. Like where does that put them?
So basically, what I would argue in this movie and in some segments of Shia Islam is it essentially tries to kind of bring it becomes almost like Christianity without the resurrection.
You think
Yeah.
Christianity without? You don't think? Okay.
I mean,
Because-
absolutely. There's a whole lot of look, these are Messiah-like figures,
Yeah.
I mean, at one point, didn't they say Muhammad is our savior?
Yeah.
Yes.
Muhammad is our
Right.
savior.
Right.
Fatima asks for her dowry the ability to intercede for people.
Right.
It looks
right.
Catholic more than.
Yeah, it is indeed. And actually, the fact that the way they kind of frame this whole thing, connecting ISIS with Abu Bakr and Omar, and
Yeah.
they are carrying the legacy, and we,
Uh-huh.
the Ali and his family, instead of having all those atrocities on them, still they're holding on to that non-violence thing. That
Right.
was the message they want to portray to
Yeah.
the Western world, that we Shias are the only nice people out here,
The real
like
peace.
non-violence.
Well, yeah, and look at what modern day Iraq looked like, right? Even in the middle of a war zone, the rest of Iraq is destroyed, but ours is perfect. It's pristine. Our houses look nice.
So on the whole, Christianity without the resurrection point. So, I'd say there's lots of what Ali is presented in this movie is honorable in lots of ways. What the ethos of the movie is, peace, self-sacrifice, is good. But because we see that embodied in Jesus, who willingly gives up his life for the sake of his enemies. But there's an ending in there where Jesus comes back from the dead as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Whereas the self-sacrifice here is for some very vague greater good.
Well, it doesn't make sense. I was watching the parts where character of Ali is listening to that voice you were mentioning. It's okay, no, I'm not gonna do this. I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna choose peace. Islam's religion of peace, then like, for what reason? Yeah, that was like my question. Like, it seemed like the whole problem was that it was very confusing. It was like, is Allah preserving his people or no? Fatima's dead, Muhammad's dead, Ali is getting all walked all over. So it's like, at what end, it's not clear.
From a narrative perspective, all those self-sacrifices in the movie are so that one kid at the end can save his friend.
Right. It's the example. It's the example, right?
Yeah, it's the example.
I mean, we do the
as
same.
long as the right narrative.
We do the
gets
same
passed
thing.
down.
We do the same thing as Christians, though, right? Like we look at the story of Jesus, and even the New Testament tells us to follow his example. So
okay,
but that's just one part of it.
Okay, there's the message of the movie. The Ali and Fatima are good people who are full of God. They're full of good. They're full of peace, and so much so that they would rather die than bring pain and division. And what does this kid do at the end? There's his friend who's the tricked, manipulated suicide bomber at the end.
Sunni Muslim,
the suicide bomber. And what does he do? He puts his life in the way of his friend, saying, no, I won't let you hurt him, and the thing that's ultimately kind of reckless, and ultimately saves 300 lives by imitating the example of Ali and Fatima.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty clear plot line. Yeah, I mean he says it at the end, right? If everybody knew, nobody ever told us their story. Everybody needs to hear her story.
Right.
So.
It's like, this is the truth. That's crazy.
yeah, it's like,
You know what? I actually had this interesting thought where I'm like, what if the disciples of Jesus, after he died, like all just kind of were like, no, it's Peter, no, it's Paul, and then pulled out their swords and had, like, we're gonna burn Peter's wife. You know what I mean? Like,
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, there was definitely not a unified front.
Like transition from Muhammad to the Caliphate was not a smooth transition. There is real historical accounts of like what was happening outside of Medina, where people gathered to select their caliph, and Umar and Abu Bakr kind of knew about it and they went in there. It's not for us, anyone, Muslims, Shias or Sunnis, to decide what their intention was, but when they went, somehow they all agreed to accept Abu Bakr as their leader. And then Abu Bakr laid the foundations of caliphate so strong, then the next caliph continued his legacy, and we see the Muslim expansion happen in those times. So
Right.
I think you just can't simply discredit all those things.
So I think, like, what I would love to see, and I love watching movies made by Muslims about Islam. What I would really like to see is something with high production value and more honest storytelling.
Right.
So I'm reading Al-Tabari's History of Prophets and Kings right now, and it really is an amazing book. So personalities like Ali, personalities like Omar, personalities like Uthman are so like vivid that they kind of like shine through whatever account they're in. And it's like, whether you're reading a Sunni source or a Shia source, then you can't quite erase the personality from these like real historical people. And the Islamic sources are not nearly as polished as modern Muslims will present them. So I'd like to see a much more sort of honest.
Yeah, the way the Tabri itself is, we were reading that and we came across some of those facts which does not represent the worldview which is established around, right? And that is, we are reading from the sources, we are not bringing it from ourselves, yet they're so attractive and so fascinating to know about, right? So
the fascinating thing about Al-Tabari is that he's a Sunni Muslim, and the Sunnis don't like his history because of its like overly positive portrayal of Ali and like overly centralization of him, and the Shias don't like it because of the way he treats Abu Bakr, Uthman, and Omar.
How does it treat him?
Like in a way that's like
No.
positive.
Okay.
In a way that's like, but if you read it, not everything he writes about them is positive. Not everything he writes about Ali is positive.
Yeah.
Like I think
Yeah.
that someone like Al-Tabari is somebody who's actually interested in the truth of history.
Like a neutral commentator.
As much as possible. Of course, Tabari was Muslim, so his understanding
Maybe the
was,
word is scholarly, right?
Yeah.
So I think he's trying to be scholarly about it as opposed to agenda
Yeah.
driven.
Yeah.
And I don't think much of this movie was scholarly.
oh,
right?
not at all.
Yeah. So that's also another contrast with how Islam's supposed to be.
So let's land the plane here on our Christian review of this Shia Muslim movie. Again, I think it's worth watching. One, because it's got high production value. It's got it's a good representation of a sort of certain Shia perspective on this, which is important to understand. Right? It's important for us to understand that perspective on history because it represents real people out in the world. If you're a conservative Sunni Muslim, or you probably shouldn't watch this movie because it's gonna
make you really mad.
you got to know what you're getting into. It's gonna betray people you consider heroes as arch villains in the narrative. So that's worth considering.
Think Superman and Lex Luthor.
Yeah.
Right. And right.
And again, if you're, but again, I watched this as a movie about the best people ever versus the worst people ever.
I guess. Yeah.
Right.
With very little in between.
Yeah.
It's,
There's a big
like-
schism there for sure.
You pick the sides. Either you're good or bad. There is no in between. It's like Ali, super good. Omar Abu Bakr, super bad. Aisha, super bad. Fatima, super good. Just draw the distinction and put them like, and this create a rift between Shias and Sunnis that's already too much divided. So it's not serving any good. I think.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, it's not serving any good.
So would you say people shouldn't watch it?
Yes, definitely. It's
You don't think it provides any?
Yeah, it doesn't serve any good. Of course, if you hate Sunnis and if you hate Abu Bakr and Umar, of course it will further enhance your feelings and experiences with that. You can do that. But if you're a person who believes, if you come from a Muslim standpoint, I'm saying it from a Muslim standpoint, if you're a Muslim and you believe that, there is no such thing as Shias and Sunnis, you are all Muslim and you believe in Islam and you stay together and stuff, this stuff is not for you, for sure.
Yeah.
It should kind of like, of course you can watch it, there is no kind of like the pressure on that.
There were interesting parts of it. I do think, even though the storytelling was like really one-dimensional, it still had some good storytelling, right? It still had some good acting. So from that standpoint, I think it's interesting. Also, as a believer, I am not as well accustomed to, the Shia perspective, right? So even though this was not maybe even the mainline Shia perspective, maybe it was a very exaggerated Shia perspective, it helped me in that regard to probably understand a little more.
So my advice is, if you're somebody who wants shows and movies to watch to learn about Muslim perspectives on history and reality, you could watch this movie for a very specific perspective on the Shia version of events, and then watch NBC's Omar as a sort of Sunni version of the events, and you'll kind of get it's fascinating to me to watch the two vastly different portrayals of these things.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, guys, thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.